welcome to the third episode of Starts at the Top, our brand new podcast about leadership, digital culture and change. I'm Zoe Amma.
And I'm Paul Thomas. This podcast aims to bring you interviews with leaders from the public, private and third sector who are using digital to navigate uncertainty and forge a path to the future. And a big thank you to everyone who listened and shared last week's episode with Dr. Anne-Maria Maffedon. If you do like what you hear, please do subscribe and share. We're on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and would love it if you would leave us a review. So how are you, Zoe? How's your week been?
It's not been bad. A big reflection for me from the last week, and I don't think this is just me. It seems to be a really common theme of a lot of discussions I'm having with other people, is video call overload. And I was speaking to someone at the weekend who does a very senior, very professional job, who was talking about how their workload had got to a point where they were doing video calls literally all day, to the point where they were really struggling to find the headspace and the time they needed to do the deep work that's really necessary for their job. And I found over the last few weeks as well that I had got to a point where I was quite possibly scheduling too many Zoom calls into my day, much as I love to talk to other people. And this week I'm making a deliberate choice to be a bit more boundaried about that and to set aside some time to do some thinking and planning and really give the best value that I can to people by taking a step back and shutting myself away to do some creative thinking. And I really hope that we'll get to a point as part of remote working being such a big part of many people's lives now, that everyone is going to be a bit more thoughtful about this online meeting culture that we've developed and whether that really works for productivity.
I think you're right. And I think I saw some noise on social media over the weekend based around the ideas from this very podcast, episode 1 with Simon Blake, where he was talking about Mental Health First Aid England's decision to cut meetings to 50 minutes and half-hour meetings to 25 minutes, just to give people that space to sort of just a toilet break from time to time, but a toilet break, a coffee break, or just a breather between meetings. And I think it's massively important. And I saw a couple of organisations talking to him over the weekend on social media about adopting that idea and trying to do that. But I don't think that's anything new. And in fact, one of the things I was trying to get through at Grant Thornton was this idea of creating a meeting calculator. So you could actually, when you put a meeting together and you said, right, I want these 5 people or these 6 people in a meeting and I want them for an hour, the Outlook calendar would tell you what the cost of that meeting was financially for the cost of those people to be on that call for an hour or for an hour and a half. But what we don't calculate is the sort of the mental health implications of being on those calls and being in those meetings and running around like a mad idiot, like I felt today a little bit, cooking, schooling, trying to get work done. And as you say, I think the biggest worry for me is the deep work.
Yeah, I think that's a big challenge at the moment, isn't it? Especially those of us who are juggling children and homeschooling and jobs or even just caring responsibilities. So what news stories have caught your eye this week, Paul?
Actually, the Facebook boycott and then the subsequent announcement by Mark Zuckerberg. In terms of how I feel about this, and this is obviously the announcement that Mark Zuckerberg has reacted to the boycott and many big organisations. I think one of my favourites and yours, Ben and Jerry's. So Unilever was probably the biggest name that pulled all advertising from Facebook. Because of Facebook's lack of interest or lack of responsibility around flagging and removing posts, particularly posts that were offensive to Black and minority accounts and people, particularly from the US president. Haha, again. And the reaction to it has been quite strong from a number of different brands, but I think it was Unilever that drew the biggest line in the sand by saying that they were going to remove all advertising from Facebook until the end of this year, which I think is an interesting move.
It's a really interesting challenge, isn't it? And I don't think there's an easy way through it. You know, I think a lot of people have seen the stories about Facebook over the last years because this is not news, is it? And obviously, the kind of crux of that was the whole Cambridge Analytica story. And I have noticed more organisations are asking questions now about using Facebook and their reliance on it. And that to me is the big part of this problem, that so many organisations very understandably have a very high dependency on Facebook. It's got a very sophisticated advertising platform. You can, for a charity, for example, there's lots of things that you can do with it around reach and fundraising and getting your brand out there. Obviously, what's behind the curtain on that is these concerns about the algorithm. So it's going to be really interesting to see how Facebook handle this and where they go from here, and whether there is going to be a commitment to look at that algorithm and do things differently, because certainly the pressure is on with this one.
Yeah, and that pressure comes in the form, I think I've seen some reports that say that $7 billion has been wiped off Zuckerberg's personal fortune. But then other commentators saying that it's not the big brands that Facebook makes its money from. Of course, it does make an awful lot of money from the big brands, but it is those smaller businesses, smaller charities, the bakery at the end of your road that are reliant on the platform. And in fact, some small businesses' entire digital presence is through Facebook and through social media. They don't actually have websites and other things that the big organizations might have. I think as well, it's big brands making that decision this week or in the last few days, whereas Facebook's policy was changed overnight, but it was Facebook's policy yesterday and the day before and the year before that. And now brands are taking the opportunity to sit up and listen. I also think there's a bit of an issue around having this stance at a time like this, after the pandemic and what we've seen with COVID-19, because it was only in May that I saw lots of press about advertising spend being pulled back across the board from big organisations. So I hope this is a real challenge to Facebook and a real catalyst for change, because from one angle it looks like brands that were already pulling funding from marketing deciding to make a bit of a song and a dance about it because it seems like it's a popular issue to jump on board with. I hope it is a real catalyst for change.
Yes, absolutely. This week, we will be sharing our interview from the beginning of May with Louise Macdonald, Chief Executive of Young Scot, and Kirsten Urquhart, who's the Digital Services Director of Young Scot. Young Scot provides young people with information, ideas, and opportunities to help them make informed decisions and choices, helping them to navigate the challenges they face as they grow up, particularly during times of transition in their lives.
We spoke to them about their work and in particular the ways that they're having to adapt the services that they offer to young people during the pandemic.
Key to driving this change is who's bought into those changes internally. We were really excited to interview Louise and Kirsten together so we could share insights with you about what a successful relationship between CEO and digital lead looks like and what the pitfalls are along the way. Well, I am delighted to be introducing two more fantastic guests to the podcast today. We're delighted to be talking to Louise Macdonald and Kirsten Urquhart from Young Scot. Louise is the CEO of Young Scot and Kirsten is the Digital Services Director. So Louise and Kirsten, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, lovely to see you.
Hello, thanks for having us.
Very welcome. Paul and I are delighted to have you here. So it'd be great just to hear about where all of this began for you both. So we've been talking to a few digital leaders over the last few weeks, and what we're always struck by is that it's a real journey. So we'd be interested to hear about where that digital journey began for both of you and where you both first started to see the potential of it for Young Scot.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll kick off mainly because I'm older than Kirsten, so my journey is probably longer in terms of that. So mine probably began I suppose I have a background in journalism, so I've always been interested in information and the role of information to empower people and so on. So that's always been of interest of mine, and then moved into the third sector and supporting young people. I suppose in terms of the true potential of digital and its and how it can support young people, for me, probably started, dare I say it, 20 years ago in 99, 2000, actually at the point of devolution, when the new Scottish Parliament was established. The new Scottish Government that was set up at the time was really, really interested in looking at digital public services. And as part of that was thinking about what are all the different ways that digital, as it was emerging at that point, could be used. And because of the work that we were doing as a charity, we already had a young person's membership card that we wanted to think about how we could use that in a bit more of a smart way. And that was when smart chip technology was very, very first time ever coming in. And also we were really interested. We used to publish a youth information handbook. We were actually one of Scotland's biggest publishers for a while, because we used to publish an information handbook every year for every young person in Scotland. And we knew we wanted to move that online. And so we partnered with the new Scottish Government on what was called, at that time, Modernising Services Programme. And that allowed us to kind of partner with them on digital public services. So we built Scotland's first ever kind of portal, youth information portal. It took us 9 months to build a kind of a site working with Microsoft. It was supported and endorsed by Bill Gates. He actually helped us launch it way back then, 20 years ago. And then started looking at smart chip technology on the card. So probably that's the kind of genesis of how really began this kind of journey towards thinking about digital and public service, but from our perspective as a partnership, a cross-sector partnership. How do you kind of use that to benefit young people and the young people that we serve? So yeah, that would be my kind of that would be my background to it. I think Kirsten's entry point's a bit more a bit more recent than mine. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, so for me, my background, I'm actually a qualified librarian. My background is around kind of information management, and really for me, that being slightly obsessed by the organisation of information and how people access information. So there was a natural kind of progression as kind of more digital kind of platforms emerged to take that kind of into that online space. So really kind of started, I've had 2 stints with Young Scot. My first one was in 2005. First started there and looked at how we were kind of developing those information services. And for me, the kind of potential for Young Scot was really about, it's being led by young people. Young people are often the early adopters of a lot of these platforms and technologies. And so wanted to really kind of, my passion around making sure that young people had access to high quality information, around kind of information literacy kind of skills, and that being really at the kind of core of what we could offer and how we could utilise digital effectively. So really that potential for Young Scot around being able to utilise those platforms and being led by young people really is kind of where I started, and being able to really continue to embed the core principles of information literacy in what we do, I think is still really important today.
That's so interesting. So much from you both there about services and obviously using user needs. Absolutely, it's the cornerstone of how you develop digitally. And then some brilliant points about data and information and how you organise it. So with both of you at Young Scot on a mission to help the charity move forward with digital, was there a step change? Was there a point at which you both suddenly realised that the momentum was building and things were changing?
I think, well, for me, I think it was when we started to really start to see youth-created content. I mean, as an organisation, we've always, our purpose is to help young people make informed decisions and choices. And we exist, alongside young people. We travel alongside young people. We've never been an organisation that's tried to get ahead of young people, because you can't, and actually you're not going to see what they see anyway. So it's always been about travelling alongside young people. And so when we started to kind of see that opportunity really for youth kind of created content, and then that content entirely being kind of led by young people, I think that was it for me, where suddenly thought, oh, this now feels quite different. And I personally really love the shift in power that kind of creates. It's a different dynamic, and it moves away from it being a kind of, paternalistic, potentially patronising kind of approach. It's actually an approach where you're supporting young people to lead, and you're supporting young people to be curious, and you're supporting young people to ask questions and find things out and share things with their peers. And that's and the way that that's done in such an immediate way is incredibly exciting. And also for us, I think, because we are so fortunate, I would say that, wouldn't I? But we work with young people. We do it because we love working with young people. But that does mean that, young people tend to get there first. So if we're working with them, we're seeing, what they're exploring in terms of kind of technology, which then allows us to be quite early adopters.
I think from my perspective, a kind of big step change has really been social media and social media platforms. And I think that as an organisation, given the kind of demographic of some of these social media platforms, and like we've said, kind of young people often being the early adopters of these platforms, it gave us kind of more potential to reach and engage directly with young people in the spaces that they were operating in. So rather than kind of expecting young people to come to us and come to our website and, find us amongst all the kind of noise and traffic on kind of search engines and things, we were able to really use those platforms to disseminate that quality assured information, and to have that conversation and open a dialogue, and to really, I think, set our tone of voice and what our kind of brand is with young people. As Louise mentioned, we are very fortunate to run the kind of Young Scot National Entitlement Cards scheme in Scotland. So there's a strong recognition of Young Scot for the cards. But I think what we were able to do with social media and through those platforms is really kind of tap into a sentiment, tap into a mood with young people, but also, again, like Louise said, kind of play about with different content types and experiment and dip our toe in different spaces, but also be inspired by the content that young people are creating. So for me, kind of more recent years, that has been the big step change for us, and it really allowed us to engage more directly with young people on their terms.
That's so interesting, that thing of getting them to set the terms of engagement. As you say, that's a real shift in the balance of power, and really letting them into the organisation, which is so exciting. And I wish more organisations work that way. So, Louise, you made this brilliant point earlier about how you've got to be led by young people and their needs rather than your charity leading them. I'd be really interested to hear from both of you about where you think young people's digital needs might have changed since the crisis began. Are there any particular trends that you've both noticed?
In the first kind of couple of weeks since lockdown, we did quite a significant piece of research with young people directly to find out what that experience was like. It's a kind of a report called Lockdown Lowdown, and in 2 weeks we got 2,500 responses from young people, and they are clearly very, very worried about the future, exceptionally worried in terms of kind of mental health. Lots of worries about money, worries about their families. So that might be family money worries or their own. And lots of concern about exams and these kind of things too, with schools and being closed for most young people and so on. And so, that real kind of need from young people that we had witnessed anyway at the beginning of the kind of the lockdown period from young people is where do I get information? Where can I find kind of useful information around this? And we were Kirsten and her team being typically brilliant, at the very beginning of COVID-19 arriving and the shutdown starting, if you like, and so this was a week ahead of lockdown being announced, recognised that our role as a youth information provider meant, well, this is what we have to do then. We have to be providing information. And so in the space of 48 hours, built a new dedicated platform, a site just for young people on or COVID-19. And the team have then been working since then to add content constantly. And it's now really, because it was there early, and that's because we were environment scanning and we were seeing what young people were talking about, and we understood, because of our knowledge about youth information, we knew that would be something that they would need to have. It's been very much kind of recognised as a kind of go-to site for young people. And, just reflecting on my earlier point, the first website that we built in 2000 took 9 months. Our latest one took 48 hours. So there's something really, I was thinking about that the other day and I was like, wow, okay, times have changed. So I think that kind of, during this period, young people's need for accurate information in amongst all the kind of noise, in amongst all the confusion, and the uncertainty and the anxiety that surrounds all of this has never been greater. And that actually came out in our survey as well, that young people wanted information that they could trust. Where do I go to find the information? So I think I'm not quite sure it's a trend, Zoe, but it's certainly, I don't think that's ever not been the case, but it's in much sharper focus. I found it quite interesting the ways that young people have used social media in particular around self-care and to kind of communicate and connect, and the way that they've kind of done that as well. I think that's been really interesting, and it's been fascinating to see how TikTok has been used in particular by young people. I think the background of TikTok is interesting anyway, because it came from music and a kind of very kind of creative kind of genesis, if you like, of TikTok, and that spirit of that seems to have been maintained. But it's been really quite interesting the way that the creative elements have come through on that, and the way that it's been used for kind of self-care and support.
Yeah, I suppose just building on that, particularly, seeing more trends of young people kind of creating content. I suppose they're spending a lot more time online due to the current kind of situation. And what we're seeing in terms of some of our kind of social listening and things is that emergence of quite kind of micro influencers. So particularly in Scotland, we have this, this very kind of unique Scottish TikTok culture, which is very, very strong. And so you've got lots of young people, including ourselves, kind of in on that. We have, we did some of the first Gaelic TikToks on the platform. We've done a challenge around kind of make it Scottish. So, playing into that, I suppose that sense of humour, people having a bit of a sense of humour at the moment and a bit more lighthearted. And I think that platforms like TikTok and Instagram stories and things kind of allows that to happen. I think also something we've seen in terms of trends is that kind of meme culture has been really strong on digital. I think people using kind of memes and GIFs and things to kind of convey how they're feeling, the use of emojis. It's almost like a different language that's emerging through this time. I don't think that's necessarily kind of COVID related, but I think it's where we're seeing young people in particular kind of using that as a bit of a coping mechanism, or to communicate how they're feeling without having to go into too much depth and too deep into things. So I think platforms like Insta Stories and TikTok and others kind of lend themselves really well there, and we're definitely seeing a lot more engagement as a charity in those spaces.
So that's really fascinating. So it's almost about developing this new language to cope with the crisis and look after each other online during the crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're seeing that. I mean, you see that predominantly with young people, but I think it's kind of creeping into everybody's kind of culture on digital platforms. But it definitely seems like a way of as you say, supporting each other and, supporting peers and friends and family, which is so important at the moment.
Yeah, there's this real sense of community and collective action at the moment, isn't there?
I think there is, Zoe, definitely there. I suppose what it does make us really thoughtful about, and it's a bit of an odd one to bring into a conversation about kind of digital leadership, but what it's also made us really thoughtful about is the young people who are not digitally connected, or the young people who, for some reason or other, have some kind of barrier towards kind of digital participation. And while it's true to say all the evidence shows that most young people have got a device, for most that's probably a phone. And for a lot of those that just have a phone, that will be a pay-as-you-go kind of contract, or there'll be a data cap. So the data package might not be great. They might be at kind of home and having to share one device amongst, 4 siblings, or, it may not be possible for them to kind of get access to digital. And I think one of the really notable things about COVID is it's really shown how reliant we are now on digital public services. Digital isn't just playing kind of games and WhatsApp. It's much more fundamental in terms of people's lives and in terms of service delivery. And so we're really thoughtful about those young people, that's just not possible for them, or are limits on how they can kind of connect and engage. And I suppose one of the hopes that if we must always be hopeful in situations like this, and that one of the things that we can be hopeful for is that people recognise that, and we shift this conversation about those young people on their phone, which, if you want to put me on the Fury train, that's the thing to say. So that we shift that and recognise how fundamental it now is. Yes, for being connected into kind of tackling social isolation, and also for being able to kind of access services that for too many are still too hard to access. So there's it's made us really thoughtful about that group, and I think it's important that we all kind of consider that, and consider those young people that we aren't able to kind of connect with right now, and what's their life like right now without digital.
Yeah, and I think that extends even further, doesn't it? It's not just about, in most instances, it is about non-availability, but even in this situation where families with more than one child who are out of school at the moment, who are having to share resources and laptops, and the strain that has on young people and also their families, and the situation that might cause at home, the stresses and mental well-being issues that go beyond even the digital realm.
Absolutely, and that's the thing around. We've done lots of content around that, some really good stuff, working with people like the Scottish Centre for Conflict Resolution. They did a great Q&A for us we crowdsourced young people's questions and so on around all of that. But again, if you're a young person, there's only one device in the house, and there's you and your mum and your brother and your wee sister, and maybe your gran as well. Then how do you all manage that in a way that actually does both the kind of practical stuff around learning and connectedness, but also, we're really interested in terms of kind of young people just being able to kind of connect with their friends, and we all know how much value there is in that, but particularly when you're a kind of teenager, when it's all about your kind of friends, and your peer group, how they're able to kind of connect with that, and the impact that has on them too. So yeah, it's just I think hopefully the good that will come from this, and amongst the good that could come from this, would be a kind of recognition that we really need to tackle that quite urgently.
I'm so pleased that you've raised this issue, because the whole digital divide is something that I've been worried about for years, but I'm even more worried about it now. So I was talking to someone from another charity this morning, where they're desperately worried about some of the people that they support who are survivors of domestic violence, obviously in some very difficult, dangerous situations at the moment, and how their very limited access to digital is potentially a matter of life or death because of lockdown. So do either of you have any thoughts on what charities can do about the digital divide?
Yeah, I think there's both a kind of a short-term, immediate kind of response, Zoe, and but also I think then there's a longer term where we need to kind of come together and really kind of collaborate and try and change policy and practice. But in the short term, I know there are some fantastic collaborations going on across organisations and partner organisations. So whether that's NCVO or Akevo, or whether it's Carnegie or who else are doing some really good stuff that I've kind of seen as well. I've seen quite a lot kind of going on with organisations coming together to say, well, how do we get devices direct to our beneficiaries? How do we then get kind of some SIM cards and data packages put together for people? So there's a very kind of immediate need, and there are good kind of clusters of activity being established at kind of local and national level to kind of help with that. And speaking in Scotland, there's been some excellent work that's been led by SCVO, working with Gartner, Scotland is, and also the Scottish Government on a super fast piece of work that they put together called Connected Scotland, which is doing just that, which is pulling people together to say, okay, how do we identify who doesn't have devices and packages and isn't able? How do we kind of work out how to get supply to them, buddies for training, support, but doing all of this with social distancing in place, of course, and doing it safely. And I've just been doing some extraordinary work around that, and I think we'll be hearing some output from that very, very soon. I think longer term, though, I think as a kind of sector, we have to bring our kind of collective voices together and work with policy and decision makers to really use the evidence that's been generated during this time to say, no, this is beyond just a kind of a nice to have. If we are shifting services to digital and essential services are being delivered via digital, then it becomes an essential service in and of itself, and we have to make sure that people have access to it.
Talking about relationships then, and it's really obvious from talking to you both that the digital evolution of Young Scot is very much a team effort. Obviously, that whole relationship between the CEO and the digital leaders is so critical, I think, for success. Kirsten, perhaps we could start with you and find out your take on what you think makes for a really good, really productive working relationship between a digital lead and a CEO.
Absolutely. I mean, I think what works within Young Scot, and particularly relationship with Louise and I, is just kind of good communication and really kind of trust between each other. We're quite, we're very aligned on our kind of values and our approach and even our kind of interest and enthusiasm around kind of digital. And you heard just Louise speak there about the kind of importance of that for young people. So I think just we're very aligned in our approach, and also it kind of helps that I can go to Louise and she very rarely says no. So quite often I do a lot of horizon scanning, looking externally from our sector as well. What are others doing, being inspired by other kind of creators, other digital platforms, other organisations, and kind of bringing that back to Louise. And sometimes it's an idea, it's a spark of an idea, and what Louise is kind of great at supporting me with is how to kind of frame it and how to position it within the context of Young Scot or within the sector. And so really kind of value that input. So we work really well together in terms of being able to kind of take a spark and an idea and really land it within the organisation. But that comes from trust, really, and just building that good understanding between each other. That's my take on it anyway.
And do you ever disagree?
Yes, I mean, I think that we definitely challenge each other around approaches, and sometimes it's about kind of looking outward and seeing other people doing things, and you might think, well, why are we not doing that? And there might be reasons for that, and so there's definitely challenge there in a healthy kind of way, and I think that it's important to have that challenge, because otherwise you can kind of, without that kind of context or a different perspective on things, it's really easy to kind of run down a path that might not be the right one. So definitely, it's not necessarily kind of disagreeing, but I think just that being able to challenge and to kind of understand different perspectives. And we don't always get it right. I think the kind of joy of working for Young Scot for me is that because we are working with an audience who are kind of often adopting these platforms kind of earlier, we can dip our toe into something and try it and play about with things, and we don't always get it right. But I think the important thing is we learn from that and we're able to kind of build on that. So I think that Louise kind of trusts me that I'm not going to make any kind of rash decisions without thinking things through. But obviously not always, if we're going to be the kind of organisation that wants to be at the forefront, then sometimes we're going to have to take some risks, and Louise lets me do that.
And that's brilliant, because I think that's a behaviour that Paul and I will have seen so many times in organisations that are really succeeding and making fantastic progress with digital, about empowering other people to try new things and to fail, but also to give them some really good ambitious goals too. So Louise, I'd be interested to hear a bit more about how you nurture and develop that kind of relationship, because so many people, whether they work in digital or not, do get quite nervous about doing things wrong. So how do you empower people to try new things and innovate?
It's a great question, and I suppose it's the purpose of a CEO, really, isn't it? I mean, what we're kind of meant to do is nurture and empower our staff team. I'm also one of these kind of people, and it's a cliche, but it's a cliche because it's true. You employ people that are better than you. You employ people that are smarter than you. And so that's kind of what I do. Kirsten knows this stuff way better than I do. And she's much smarter at it than I am. And that's why I employed her. So it's about them saying, right, okay, on you go. We'll put the structures in place that allow you to be brilliant. Yeah, so we'll give you training and we'll give you support and we'll give you resources, and we'll, much as we can. As any charity, we'll have to get my tiny violin out, my tiny charity violin, in terms of whenever you say resources. That my job is to kind of create the conditions for Kirsten to be brilliant. But the reason that I want Kirsten to be brilliant is because I want to change the lives of young people. That's what we're about. We're about improving the lives of young people, and that support, and so that approach applies across the whole organisation. We are trying to help young people and make their lives better and help them have amazing, happy lives that are fulfilling, and lives that take them wherever they want to go. And so to do that, we need a great staff team, and to do that, you need a happy staff team. So, it's a golden thread, and it's hardly kind of anything that you'd need to go to the Harvard Business Review for. It's pretty basic stuff, but a lot of that also is about getting the values set right, creating the kind of the culture, and then role modeling and living that culture. And I can't expect people to do things that I wouldn't, or I can't expect things from my team that I wouldn't, try myself, and those kind of things. So it's really important to me to kind of role model those kind of behaviours as well. So yeah, but I don't really think any of this is kind of rocket science. Some of that, but it is quite interesting. Sometimes you do kind of notice sometimes where other people have maybe done something, you think, oh, that's an interesting way of doing it. Oh, right, okay, but we, it's the way we operate. And I suppose I'm one of these incredibly lucky people. I had a phenomenal mentor who did the same for me. So in many ways, I was, what I'm doing is just moving things along and passing it on, what I learned from my kind of mentor as well. So yeah, but that trust thing is key, but always bringing people back. And I suppose that's maybe the thing that I kind of do, and it's not really a disagreement or an argument, but where there's often challenge is where maybe there's we've got a great idea, we could try this. My question will always be, how does that benefit the young people we serve? How will that make their lives better? And that's what Kirsten meant about strategically landing it in the organisation. How does it fit our mission and purpose? How does that help us deliver the impact and the change that we want to see for young people? So I'll quite often be asking that kind of question. But I'll also put my hand up. I am also one of those really annoying chief executives that comes in and go, I've seen somebody else is on Twitch. Why are we not there yet? I will do that occasionally. But and then Kirsten will tell me why not, and that's okay, that's fine. But I am guilty of kind of coming in and suddenly going, hang on, why are we not doing this yet? Have we tried this yet? But that's part of a really active respectful, I think, conversation that we have as kind of colleagues who are really committed to the same purpose.
Yeah, I like the point about Twitch. I'm an avid gamer and have been for years and years and years. And I remember it was probably about 10 years ago, the Navy used Xbox to advertise to young people about careers in the Navy. And I thought that was a fantastic way of using digital. And I also really like the point about how it's not rocket science, but maybe there was a little bit of brain surgery involved, where you're trying to get people to back you and change minds and change opinions. And I just wondered, you must have tremendous backing from your board of trustees. Is that a strong and trusted relationship as much as the one between the two of you?
It absolutely is. We have a really excellent board and always have. Really fantastic support from our chair, Elma Murray, who was previously a local authority chief executive, really visionary, incredibly committed to young people, and in particular in kind of co-design and allowing young people to lead and putting young people in the driving seat. So she's incredibly knowledgeable and skilled. Her experience is extraordinary, but also her kind of commitment to young people really is it's a real honour to work with Elma. And then the rest of the board as well. A quarter of our board are under the age of 26. So our vice chair, when she became vice chair, she was 17. They have this habit of growing up, so she's now 19. And also our youngest trustees, 16, and so on. So we have young people actually on our board because we believe in young people being at the table, not in separate rooms, having different conversations. So young people involved in that. And the rest of the board, we've got a great portfolio mix. So we have people with comms experience, we have people with business experience, public service experience as well, and also really excellent digital. So we have and have had great trustees and still have trustees with brilliant experience in digital, very kind of high levels. So we have Scott McGlinchey, Chief Executive of Exception, and Scott used to work for Fujitsu and a whole range of kind of companies, and he's been brilliant on things like even just providing very practical insight and strategic guidance around things like we're currently making our move into kind of AI and these kind of things. So he's been really excellent to be able to call on him. So yeah, we have expertise around the table that's specific to digital that we can call on, but the whole board is committed to digital and what we can kind of do with it. So it's not as if digital sits in a silo on the board, or when it's talked about, everybody turns around and looks at Scott McGlinchey, that thing that can sometimes happen. Actually, everyone on the board is part of the conversation around digital and really gets it.
there's a massive time of change for boards as well, and it's just fantastic that you've got a board who are so digitally savvy and work together really well. What advice would you give to other charities where perhaps the board and the organisation as well are quite new to digital, and obviously they need to rapidly digitise things because of the crisis?
I think that it would be to work with others, so see what others are kind of doing. So partner with others, get chairs from different organisations to maybe have some conversations together to inspire each other. If there's a way of kind of connecting the board to the beneficiaries, and I know that's difficult in the current kind of climate, but there's a way of them hearing directly from beneficiaries about what a difference it makes, so what's the story of the difference it makes by being able to connect digitally, and so on. I've seen some brilliant stuff being shared about just the difference that it's making to people in terms of self-isolation, or the steps that charities are taking to kind of keep in contact. Chest Heart and Stroke Scotland have just been doing some extraordinary work in terms of keeping in touch with their kind of members who've experienced kind of strokes and so on, just keeping in touch with them digitally and through phone calls and things. And I think generating these stories then shows the trustees that the difference that it can make, and they will be trustees around the table because they care about the work that's kind of going on, and so I suppose it's that seeing that evidence of the difference that it can make is always going to be, it can always feel a bit kind of scary, but if it's an area that you don't know. But I think that's also about the chief executive and the chair and that relationship working and working well, and the chair kind of stepping up into taking on a kind of a role there as well. If there's a kind of board that maybe is a wee bit hesitant about using digital, I think there's a responsibility there for the chair working with the chief executive to come up with the kind of the evidence that shows the difference that would be make. But again, I'd come back to collaboration. There's nothing better than speaking to other people and being inspired by what other people are doing as well.
I think just to add to that as well, I think that for lots of kind of charities in the sector in terms of digital, I think collaboration is key, but also, it's an opportunity to innovate. It's an opportunity to kind of look and see kind of what is fit for purpose for your particular organisation. Look and see what others are doing, and I suppose in a way you've got that benefit potentially of hindsight, how others have embedded kind of platforms and how it's working. So to learn from what works and what hasn't worked, but the opportunity to kind of take a deeper dive into what is it you currently do and how could that be pivoted to a kind of digital environment. But just building what Louise said, that collaboration and kind of asking for support and asking other organisations what they've done and taking the best bits, I think is key at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And boards kind of leaning into that and really embracing it as a learning opportunity as well. So obviously this is a real time of huge change and huge learning for all organisations and for you both as leaders, I would have thought. Where do you think you might be at the end of this? How would you both like to have developed further in your role as digital leaders?
I think for me it's being in a kind of digital team, we were quite used to using a lot of the tools and technologies and platforms and things that were available, so there's potentially been less of a kind of harsh transition during this time. However, I think for me what has really been quite prominent is the kind of ways of working, and it's been less about the technology and more about the team and the way that we're kind of communicating and the way that we're engaging. And for me, as a kind of leader, as a director with an organisation, I kind of feel like I'm more visible to my team and the whole team. So kind of while we don't have a huge hierarchical structure at Young Scot, being kind of being more connected, I think, through, kind of remarkably, even though you're not physically in the same space. I think absolutely for me, some of the takeaways is around the kind of communications approach, how adaptable we've been around that and how kind of willing people have been to embrace that. And also I think for me as a leader, that thing about not everything has to be perfect, that actually, it's about let's see how this progresses. Let's try things. Let's get feedback. Kind of listening to the team and the wider organisation. So I think that it's been more around that kind of team environment and how kind of digital actually can connect you in different ways. I think is something that I'll definitely take forward into whatever happens next. Definitely.
And what about you, Louise?
Yeah, I would echo that. The way it's flattened the hierarchy, as Kirsten said, as kind of unhierarchical as Young Scot strives to be, there's still this sort of sense that I'm chief executive and I'm, and I kind of, people see me kind of in and out because I'm in and out of meetings all the time because I'm doing that chief executive thing of, meeting stakeholders and so on. And it means actually as much as how hard I try to kind of keep connected with every member of the staff team, quite often it's with the senior management, the senior team that I'm most connected with. Actually, through this kind of period, I'm actually way more connected and way more visible to every member of the staff team. And there's a kind of a connection there, which I find fascinating. I've not really worked that through. I don't know what sort of PhD study that's going to turn into for somebody that works in one of these kind of big companies or universities or whatever. No doubt it'll appear somewhere. But it's just really interesting. I've kind of noticed that I feel way, way more kind of connected with everyone. And the other one is still kind of a bit internal, but linked to the external. I don't think anybody that knows me a little bit would ever describe me as unambitious. I am known for being quite ambitious in terms of what we want for the organisation and what we want to deliver for young people. But in terms of the work that we've done over recent weeks since lockdown happened, it's really shown me the art of the possible. Back to this, being able to kind of build the site in 48 hours. The way we've been able to kind of organise, the way we've been able to kind of shift our co-design services online, the way we've shifted our card entitlements, lots of them now are online. But just the kind of collective will that went behind that the kind of the mindset that went with it is obviously a huge part of it, but also just this kind of permission to kind of go, we all have to do this differently now. So everything else is gone. What can we actually deliver right now with this situation has meant we've really delivered in a kind of powerful and in a really quick way. So in some ways, the leadership lesson for me is that this might make us even more ambitious about what we can deliver for young people. And I know that feels like a kind of odd thing to say, but it's definitely kind of there. And the last thing I think for me in terms of kind of leadership that I've been really thoughtful about is that potentially for the first time ever, this is an experience that everybody is going through at the same time, like every single person, and for us, every single young person. And whilst, we're all in the same situation, not everyone's situation is the same. And so the way that this has exposed, inequalities and difference and some of the gaps in services and these kind of things, I think really is something that I think we need to find moments to go back and say, well, hang on, what were the bits that were exposed? Because everybody was in exactly the same situation at the same time, but with a different experience and a different lens on it. What did that show us? What did we see that wasn't visible on the landscape before because not everyone was experiencing the same context? So I think again, and that applies as much internally in terms of how the Young Scot staff team have experienced lockdown as it does in terms of those that we're here for and the young people that we exist to serve.
So it could be the moment which further galvanises civil society.
You'd hope so, right? I mean, in all of these kind of things, some of the experiences that people are having is horrifying, and I have absolutely moments in the day where it feels really quite dark and difficult. But it has to be that we can see points of hope on the horizon. So where are the kind of the places where we say, well, do you know what? we've maybe got a wee way to go yet, but when we do get there, we're going to change that. That's not what we're going to take with us. It's a bit like the really beautiful piece that Arundhathi Roy wrote the other week. What's in the luggage that we want to take with us, and what do we want to leave behind?
It's a great way to end. A great way to end. Thank you. Who are your digital heroes? Who are the people that it might be organisations, it might be individuals, but who are the people you really admire?
Well, Zoe's one of them. Ross McCulloch, Third Sector Lab, great people within the kind of Scottish sector that are pulling together information, creating networks, opportunities for other kind of charities like ourselves to have a voice in this sector. So definitely, I would say Ross McCulloch, Third Sector Lab would be one of those people.
Yeah, I would heartily endorse those. I think for me, I think I would certainly say I make a specific point of following women of colour on Twitter, because I think their kind of experience and understanding the experience of kind of women of colour is important for me to be challenged, and for me to kind of understand what are the kind of the issues that they face. So that's something that I do quite kind of deliberately. So I'm particularly loving the work that Charity So White are doing just now, and really inspired by them. And another one that always makes me stop and think is a man called Paul Gray, who until last year was Chief Executive of the NHS in Scotland. And you'll find him on @PAG1962 on Twitter. And he's really embraced technology since he's retired, which I love. He was always on Twitter, but it was quite kind of, within a civil service kind of frame. Now he's started producing these really, really lovely threads, and he does them most days. And without question, there is something in his thread that always speaks to the thing that's niggling at me that day. There's always something in it that makes me go, that's it, or, oh, that's really interesting. I always seem to find something in his threads at exactly the moment when I need to find it. So I would heartily recommend Paul.
Wonderful. So thank you so much, Louise, and thank you, Kirsten. There was so much there to inspire other leaders and get them thinking, regardless of whether they're in a charity or not, about how they really need to be led by their users' needs, and to be optimistic at this time of terrible fear and the global pandemic. Understandably, people are just full of worry and anxiety, but there are still reasons to be hopeful. So thank you very much for sharing that message with us here today. Huge thank you to Louise and Kirsten there for sharing some superb insights, which I learned a lot from. What jumped out at you, Paul?
You mentioned before the interview that the idea of, we wanted to share this and we wanted to share them speaking together, because it's really important, the relationship between chief executive and the digital team and how they work together. And I think what came across was the level of trust and their ability to disagree. I think that was a good point as well. But Louise really saying a few things that connected with me, that she employs people that are better than her at doing a specific thing because they're the experts and she needs their expertise, because the sole aim of the charity is to help young people, and she needs everybody on board so that they can constantly deliver against that objective. So I thought that was a really telling point.
Absolutely. And I thought they both made some really interesting points about the role of boards and how boards are really critical to driving digital change and to creating the leadership for it as well, really supporting the executive with what they are trying to achieve from digital. And I was really interested in what they were talking about with the digital divide and how we can't assume that all young people can get online, that they don't all have the devices and the money for data and the resources to get access to studying online or even accessing digital services. So I was really pleased that they raised that point, and I look forward to picking them up again in a future podcast.
I think the other point that really struck home was the idea that they don't just pay lip service to young people; they have young people included on the board as well. How many charities or how many boards can argue that they have people from the exact demographic that they are serving on their board, so they are actually listening to the young people they serve through that medium as well?
Absolutely. You've really got to co-create the future in partnership with the people that you work with, haven't you?
And that the last point, the points of hope on the horizon. All three of our interviews so far this season have been hugely optimistic about the future, regardless of the fact that, we are all experiencing such a strange and weird time at the moment.
Definitely. We've got another fantastic guest or guests lined up next week, and we can't wait to share that with you. So keep an eye on your social feeds for more information.
We are on Twitter at Starts at the Top 1. That starts at the top, number 1, where you can share your questions and your feedback. Zoe, do you want to give people the email address?
Yes, we're at startsatthetoppodcast@gmail.com. That's startsatthetoppodcast@gmail.com.
Like us, leave a review, all the good stuff. That would be hugely appreciated. Thank you to all our listeners, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.